Hi, everybody. Gary Francione for the Abolitionist Approach. Gary Steiner here from Bucknell University visiting with us this weekend, and we're having all sorts of interesting discussions. We were talking before about the idea, this is something that we both worked on and we both have an interest in, and the idea about how do you get people to do things? How do you get them to change and change their behavior morally, or their moral behavior or their immoral behavior and make it moral? And I think a lot of people get frustrated because they say, well, the logic against animal exploitation is just so strong. Why don't people accept it? Why is it not the case that, why isn't logic enough? And the answer is because it's not. Because, logic can only get you so far. You need to be concerned about others, and you need to have an impulse to want to act on that concern.
That's right. So we were talking about Bernard Williams, a famous British philosopher who died a few years ago, who has this idea that if there's a person who doesn't already have moral concern, there's no reason that you can give them that will automatically produce more moral concern in them. It's almost like you're living in two different kinds of universe, one that has moral concern, one that doesn't have moral concern. But for anybody who does have moral concern, at least for fellow human beings, and it could be people who are very much like yourself, or maybe not all people, but some subset of humanity, some other beings for whom you have moral concern, that's where logic can really help you to sort of broaden your sense of the range of your proper moral concern. And our position is that anybody who really understands in a robust sense that you have and ought to have moral concern for your fellow human beings is stopping very arbitrarily by refraining from having moral concern for non-human animals, because it's really ultimately the same reasons that should make us motivated to have concern for human beings that should apply equally to non-human animals.
And people always ask, well, what do you do with somebody who says, I just don't care? I just don't really care about morality, or I don't care about animals, or I don't care about humans. And the answer is, well, there are some people like that. But you know what? There are a lot of people who aren't like that. So just sort of move on from those people and go to people that you can have a good discussion with. And I think that that's really important. I call it moral concern and moral impulse. Gary calls it kinship concern,
Felt kinship.
or felt kinship. But it's this idea that logic isn't enough. That we need to have an affective component, an emotional component, I guess, is an equally appropriate word to say that moral behavior can't be reduced to syllogisms. You need the syllogisms are useful, but only in the situation where people care about the conclusions of those syllogisms, and people are concerned about morality, and people are concerned about others.
Right, and if you think about it, it's the very peculiar human being who has no moral concern whatsoever, who's an absolute ethical egoist. And so for people who say, look, I just don't care, I think the problem ultimately is either there's nothing you can do, or you have to help them kind of come back to their moral center and help them remind themselves that they really do care even when they claim that they don't. So at the end of my Animals and the Limits of Postmodernism book, I say that for many people, I think it requires some type of shock out of your sense of habitual, accustomed ways of doing things. In my own case, the real shock, the initial shock for me came reading Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, when I was 15 years old. And it horrified me in a way that just shook me out of my accustomed way of valuing animals, and I never saw them the same way again.
Yeah.
And I think that's the either or. It's either there's nothing you can do, or there's got to be a way that people are finally brought face to face with non-human animals where they really see themselves in the animal the way they much more easily tend to see themselves in the eyes of other human beings.
I mean, I think that many, maybe even most people are concerned about animals morally, but and with those people, logic can work. You can, if you've got somebody who really does see at least some non-humans as persons, you can help that human to see other non-humans as persons. And I think that's really the starting point for most people. I think most people, particularly most people who are talking with you about animal rights and veganism and whatnot, they care about animals. And just they don't make the connection. They love their dog, but they stick a fork into another animal. And what we need to get them to see is that that's just unclear thinking, and that they're not following through with what they really believe. But sometimes I get the question from animal advocates, which I find somewhat disturbing, when they say, well, we need to go out there and have campaigns that are, that will accommodate people who don't care at all. What do you do about people who don't care at all? We need to be changing the law or changing industry practice so that people who don't care will be forced to treat animals in a better way. And the answer is that's never going to work. The standards of animal welfare law are very low because animals are property, and for the most part, we protect their interests only when we get a benefit, and that's generally a financial benefit. And so the standard of animal welfare is very, very low. Industry will do what is economically sound. Again, the standards will be very low. So this idea that we're going to help animals in the face of people who don't care by changing the law or changing industry practice is just a useless project. It won't work. It can't work. What we can do is focus on the people who are concerned about animals and convince them they need to go vegan. And then they ought to go out and educate other people to go vegan. And we can then shift the paradigm. It's easy to go vegan. It really is. Go to our website, howdoigovegan.com. Thank you very much for listening. And Gary, thank you for participating.
Pleasure to be here. Go vegan.